Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's Michelle Silverman Bedell from Silverson's Realty. I'm going to invite Maria Esposito to speak about real estate and mortgages. And there she is. Hi, Maria. How are you?
Hi, I'm well. How are you?
I am good, thank you. So today we're going to speak. There's been a lot of talk about the interest rates, and why don't you chime in, and then I'll speak to you about what I read recently, an interesting scorecard kind of on the hot markets for a seller or a buyer in New
Yeah,
York and throughout New York State. So tell
yeah,
me
yeah.
what's going on with the mortgages.
So, the Federal Reserve, right, lowered their rates again in December. So I think for
Right,
the year, it's been now three quarters of a percent rather,
right,
that they've lowered their benchmark rate. Now, what gets confusing for people is that like when the Fed lowers their mortgage rates, that is for short term. It's what's considered short term rates. So
right,
things like HELOCs and credit cards, unfortunately, our savings, like what we get paid for, like a savings
right,
account or deposit accounts, those rates will now come down. So if you have a home equity line of credit, that's I personally have a home equity line of credit on my property. It's prime -1 is what I
right,
happen to be at. Now that prime is at 6.75%, my
yeah,
rate on my HELOC is 5.75%, right? I mean,
right,
that's down from about almost like 8% 2-3 years ago.
right, right.
So, but in terms of like mortgages, like when you're getting your a first mortgage on a property, and not a home equity line of credit, those are considered long-term rates. And the long-term rates aren't always going to be affected immediately by the Fed cut. Typically, that's going to be more of a gradual, like what you'll see is gradual because long-term rates are based off of more of like what's called the 10-year
Right,
T-note as well as the as bond prices. And it's very dependent upon the markets. And so the markets already have planned for that rate cut. Like it was anticipated that the Fed would
right,
be doing that cut. And so that's why we've seen mortgage rates coming down, since the, summertime, right? Because
right,
those cuts were spoken about months ago, and now
right.
they're just acting on them.
Okay, so
So, yeah,
look, I think what you'll see in the real estate market, yeah, the market is very busy. Always December for me is very busy. People want
same.
to close. They want to close. They want to close usually before the first of the year in many cases, or but I'm seeing a lot of buyers coming in, starting to trickle back into the market. What I am seeing is there's there's no inventory to the point of and especially in some communities, I don't even have to put a price in. I just put the school system in, which is the way I search for property. Because in
Hmm.
Westchester, there are some communities where the post office will be one way, like Scarsdale, but the school system may be New Rochelle or Yonkers or Eastchester. So you really have to. I always search by school system. It gives me a more accurate view of what's doing in that particular community.
Hmm.
But there's just so little inventory, and I'm seeing people starting to scoop up houses that have been sitting on the market, and even those homes are selling. So it's always a good time to buy if you're looking. Not that
Yeah.
you don't necessarily get a great price unless it's overpriced, and then you will get a good price on a house. But I am seeing things even going to the asking price or above in certain areas. So it's a funny market.
Yeah.
I see it as still a strong seller's market in most cases. This morning I came through my internet feed, and it said that they gave points to different parts of the country, which is a neutral market, which is a seller's market, which is a buyer's market. And it broke it down by country, by state, by city. So
Hmm.
the overall market in the United States, the way they saw it, was a neutral market, right? Neither strong seller, neither strong buyer. But in the Northeast and they broke down cities. There were some city, and it's basically a seller's market. And I could see, even though Westchester communities were not identified by city or village or town, it's still overall a very strong seller's market. And there were many cities upstate New York, and it's quite a few in Connecticut that was seen as strong sellers markets. The area where they put a strong buyers market were really in the South, so on the Gulf Coast or different parts of Florida and other cities in the South and or Midwest, where you'll see opportunity for a buyer. I read another article yesterday where
Right.
there's a lot of opportunity in the Midwest. It's not our market, it's not my market, but
Right.
it's interesting to see where people are gravitating if they're being priced out of a specific geographic area and they have the opportunity to move. So it was a very interesting article because they broke it down numerically.
Yeah.
And each area kind of like a scorecard. So it was interesting. And I could tell you here that the market here is absolutely driven by inventory.
Right.
And, which is not great for the buyer. It's still good for the seller, and we'll see. Hopefully, after the new year, we'll see how the market, how this translates into a buyer versus a seller's market, and that's what we're going to speak about next week. About
So,
the
but it's
2022.
interesting to see the use of the word like neutral market, because I read an article this morning in regards to rates, and we are predicted to be in a neutral interest rate environment, probably for the next, now they're saying 2-3 years.
Right.
And what that means is when rates are, and especially if rates continue to go down a little bit more as they're predicted to, but if they stay in the 5 to 6% range, that's considered to be a neutral market for rates, and anything above that is high rates, and anything below that is low rates. So, I still think, Michelle, we have a bunch of sellers or potential sellers that are sitting in homes where they have rates that are below the neutral rate, right? And they're don't want to give those up. But if we get to, if we sustain this neutral interest rate zone, and especially if we get to into the low fives, and then somebody is able to, they take advantage of pricing with their local banks or, institutions that offer relationship pricing, then they are in the fours, right? And then I think that we will see more people be like, okay, you know what? I don't need this big home in Westchester anymore. Let me downsize to something so that somebody else can pick this up. Yeah.
Right. So it'll be good for buyers. It'll also be good for sellers because they'll be more encouraged to sell. So to be continued for next week with more, I'm sure, more numbers and more information. And hopefully Leslie will join us next week for the final wrap.
Hopefully. All right. Well, have a great weekend. Happy holidays, everyone.
Same here.
All right. Take care.
Be
Bye.
well. Bye-bye.